Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is meeting with President Trump today, and he's set to sign a highly anticipated preliminary deal that gives the U.S. a share of critical raw materials, including rare earth metals used in laptops, electric vehicle batteries, and cancer treatment drugs. In exchange, Zelensky wants full support from the United States in its 3-year war against Russia, plus a guarantee of peace and security. The agreement is set to be signed in a few hours, with both Trump and Zelensky already confirming that a deal is happening. Joining us to discuss the specifics laid out in the plan and what comes next for Ukraine and Russia is retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, who also hosts Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. Lieutenant Colonel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So my first thought when I heard about this deal is, what does this mean for potential peace agreements between Ukraine and Russia? Is this an indication that the U.S. is going to continue to fund the war in perpetuity, or will Trump still try to pressure Zelensky into coming to the negotiating table?
Well, that's the million-dollar question that nobody has really answered very clearly. There was some ideas given and some clues passed on this past week when you had Emmanuel Macron here on, I think it was Monday, and then Keir Starmer yesterday. And in those meetings, you hear Trump continuing to talk about ending the war. But then he made an interesting shift yesterday where he says, yeah, well, I think we're going to seek an end to this. It could come real soon, or it may not happen at all. But he is signing the deal with Zelensky today, implying that he wants to sign that deal almost irrespective of where the war ends up going. So it's unclear to me where the benefit really lies for Ukraine, because if they think they're going to get security guarantees, and Zelensky released a video yesterday that he does think he's going to get that from Trump, I think he may be sorely disappointed.
Do you think that in terms of where the president is on this, that in terms of the deal that's being made, should Russia pull back? The expectation, I think, is that for United States businesses will go in and help with the rebuild efforts. Is that letting Russia off the hook for what it's done in terms of its invasion on Russia and rebuilding the country?
Well, see, I think we need to look at it from a different perspective. It's not letting Russia off a hook or putting them on the hook or anything like that. It only matters what can and cannot be done on the battlefield. And right now, Russia is in the dominant position. They can basically dictate terms. If they don't get the terms that they want from Trump in negotiations, they'll simply keep fighting. And they are expressly saying that out loud. Sergei Lavrov said there won't be any ceasefires. We're not going to stop fighting until we have a deal that meets our satisfaction. And the fact is, they can afford to do it. They have the personnel, they have the equipment, they have the ammunition, the defense industrial base, everything you need. Ukraine doesn't. So that's going to be a big issue that we have to come to grips with. It's not about letting Putin off the hook, because that implies that we have a choice to make, that we can choose not to, that we can choose it's going to be different. And I don't see any actual choice on the table. And that's something that few people in the West have come to grips with yet, I think.
And it seems like this administration is a little bit more clear-eyed about the reality of the situation right now. We've heard Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and other members of the administration effectively say that whatever peace agreement they do reach is probably going to result in Ukraine ceding some territory that they had control of prior to the war. What do you think the key elements of a potential negotiation settlement would look like?
Well, if you listen to what the Russians are saying, and they have nearly said the exact same thing from before the war started and all the way through, they keep going back to what the outlines of the deal that would have been met in Istanbul in April 2022 are still basically the same. Ukraine will never be in NATO. It will be an independent nation, but it will have no military alliances, and it will be what they call demilitarized. So now then the Russians are actually saying you're going to have to minimize how many troops you even have, because their whole issue is security on their western border with no NATO there. And now then Putin has also added in since last June, and they have reiterated this in recent days as well, all 4 of the administrative borders of the oblast that they annexed in October of 2022. And that means that there's a lot of territory that Ukraine still has of those 3 oblasts. They would have to withdraw from there, and that will be a very bitter pill to swallow. It's not even just the amount of territory that Russia has gained so far, but they would, the West would, or Ukraine would have to willingly give up even more. The problem is, if they don't agree to that, Russia will keep fighting. And right now, they have the capacity. They can continue to grind and destroy Ukrainian forces until they have the territory that they want. That's the problem.
So by demilitarizing Ukraine, what does that do for the rest of Eastern Europe, and what some of the concerns that the rest of Europe will have on this?
The rest of Europe does have a lot of fears and a lot of scares and a lot of concerns. They shouldn't, because I mean, just look at what Russia has been able to do with their whole force on just the eastern portion of Ukraine for 3 full years. And it's taken months to take towns as small as Bakhmut or Avdiivka or Chasiv Yar. And the idea that they could roll past that and then all of a sudden now take on Western cities with a 32-member military alliance, I just don't think is realistic at all. And I don't see any evidence that Russia has designs to do that, or the force capacity. If they continue to grow and they get bigger conventionally, then that may become an issue later, which is why I think it's in America's interest and Western European interest to get this war over with quickly, so that Russia doesn't have the incentive and the motivation to continue building their forces, which in the future could pose a threat to Western Europe.
As this deal between Ukraine and the U.S. related to rare earth minerals came to fruition, Putin made an offer of his own with offering the U.S. some sort of strategic trade agreement with their rare earth minerals. What do you see of the likelihood of Trump making a deal with Russia on that issue? And is this sort of a ploy by Putin to try to blow up the Ukrainian relationship with the U.S.?
I don't think it's a ploy, because there really isn't much. I mean, Trump has been very clear about where he sees Ukraine going in the future, and he has been even more clear, especially at the Riyadh meetings between the U.S. and Russia, that he's looking beyond this war already. He's looking for improving our relationships. That's why they're in the process right now of reestablishing full diplomatic engagements at the embassies and whatnot. He's looking at things like redoing this New START treaty, which runs out in just a year from now, actually a little bit less than a year from now. That's something that's a priority to him, and the economic, from Trump's perspective, relations that he wants to go to benefit the United States. So I think when Putin offers that, I think he realizes that's something that does interest Trump. And if they can get relations back to anything approximating a normal relationship, then lots of people will benefit from, economic issues, not the least of which is Western Europe, who has lost a lot of the inexpensive gas that they had been experiencing before that, and their economic output has suffered as a result. I'm sure they would be happy to get that to go back as well.
So when you're looking at this, you're speaking about this from a global standpoint, how Western Europe will benefit if the war was to end, that would keep Russia from continuing to be an aggressive. But what does that do for Ukraine, in your opinion? Is it not just stopping the war, but are there other economic benefits that come to Ukraine from this?
Listen, we're way past the point where Ukraine could have benefited from anything. Once the war started, and then nobody in the West or nobody in Kiev was willing to stop it. All of the multiple opportunities they had for off-ramps that could have, the deals like the Istanbul Agreement in 2022, many chances could have saved a lot more of Ukraine. They've been lost. It's now past tense. So you can't undo all the damage that's been done. So now the best you can do is just get by and survive with the parts that you can get, which is going to be the rest of everything on the left side of wherever this line ends up being. But the biggest thing is that they can stop dying, because they have lost an entire generation of men that they are desperately going to need all the men that they have alive right now to rebuild their country and start moving forward. And the faster they can get that killing stopped, the better for Ukraine.
We've got about 30 seconds to a minute left, but wanted to get your thoughts. Going back to the beginning of the war, there were reports that UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson scuttled potential negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. With 2020, hindsight being 2020, do you feel like that was a mistake?
Without question, it was a catastrophic decision. And that was, from what I can understand from talking to people on the inside in the Ukrainian government, that was an equal decision, but actually primarily Zelensky himself. Apparently Johnson did have some influence and did have an opinion, but it was Zelensky who made the call and to end that. And there has just the catastrophic results of his country since that time are so egregious, and it could have been over before. So just imagine, you could have had the war over on November in 2022, and instead you're going to get it over now, probably in 25, but with this vast cost that you have lost unnecessarily. That's going to be a bad one.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for joining us this morning on Rising.
Always my pleasure.
Will retired air traffic controllers fill the void? We'll dive in coming up on Rising.